Hello and welcome back to the Surfer's Library, proudly presented by Hillsborough Surf Club. I'm Billy Jack, your guide through the pages of surf history, culture, and legends. Aloha, my friends. I'm so glad that you're paddling back out with us for another episode of the Surfer's Library. This episode, we continue reading Transcendental Memories of a Surf Rebel by Michael Lear Hinson and Donna Clausen-Jost. Please don't forget that if you would like to read the book for yourself, it's available on Amazon.com and EndlessDreamsPublishing.com. It's full of great pictures that you're really going to have a hard time finding anywhere else, and it's a great way to start your own surfer's library. Also, a reminder that if you'd like to help support the podcast, you can do so by visiting buymeacoffee.com/the surfer's library to do so. It helps cover the cost of producing the podcast, so any little bit helps. When we last left off, Mike was getting into the smuggling game with the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, chambering out surfboards and stuffing them with contraband to fund the work of peace, love, and enlightenment. We now pick up in Chapter 35. Mike is back in Hawaii with Melinda and living on the North Shore a few doors down from another surfing legend, Herbie Fletcher. Let's dive in. Chapter 35. Gypsies of Oahu. I was a gypsy in the 60s. California, Hawaii, I had no permanent address. I laid my surfboard down wherever I was welcome, in cars, garages, a makeshift treehouse, or in boats in the Ala Moana Harbor. Except for the time gentleman Paul Strow invited me to stay with him and his family up in the Manoa Valley overlooking Waikiki and Diamond Head, I didn't need much to survive. I have to say, Paul gave me the royal treatment. He took me surfing everywhere and introduced me to all the locals. It was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, and a true honor and privilege to have him as a friend. Things definitely improved when Melinda came into my life. After a couple of years in business, Chuck and I closed the clothing store. It was a good experience, but sales started dropping. We decided it was time to end it on a good note. At the end of 1967, Melinda and I moved to Oahu and rented a house on the beach in front of back door at Pipeline, a few doors down from Herbie Fletcher. Melinda's talent was giving our house a homey feeling. She's really artistic. She made paisley curtains, laid out grass mats on the floors, and everywhere you looked there were either flowers or Hawaiian pillows. No matter where we lived, she made our home something to behold. Mornings in the islands consisted of rolling a joint, fresh papaya, and a glass of guava juice. Then, depending on the surf, I'd either start shaping or paddle out. I was always the first to show up at the islands every year. I'd arrive early, October, sometimes September. I was the welcoming committee when the gang flew over. Reno, Jerry Lopez, Bob McTavish, Nat Young. This was way before they had girlfriends or wives. They'd all go skiing that time of year. I hated the cold, so I headed for Hawaii and scoped out cars, places to stay, waves, and restaurants. I had it wired. My other favorite thing to do in the islands was pick up friends from the airport. I loved it. I always knew who was coming to surf which breaks by the boards that came out of baggage. The size of the board gave you a clue to their intention. Most Hawaiians didn't surf the North Shore. They grew up with it, so it was no big deal. Waikiki was fine, but there were definitely no excuses when the surf got big. The few brave who were packing a big wave gun were making a statement. No Johnny Fames, Robert August, DTs, or Skip Fries on the North Shore. One big wipeout and they were gone. Not everybody that came over surfed, though. Family and friends had an open invitation to visit any time. Johnny Griggs was the one who really needed a vacation. There was a constant stream of visitors coming to his house for advice or help or just to hang out. His door never closed. That can really get to you after a while. So one day the Griggs family dropped out. They didn't tell a soul. They just disappeared and showed up on our porch on the North Shore. The 2 weeks the Griggs spent with us were jam-packed. We wanted to do something different than just hang around the house. Johnny and Carol had become such good friends. Melinda and I thought the world of both of them, and we wanted to make their visit special. So we shipped our old bread truck over to Kauai, and I drove the 6 of us all around the island from the trail at Hanalei on the North Shore as far south as Waimea Falls. Ever since Johnny's first acid trip, he didn't drive. He didn't want to contribute to the ozone. He also had a reputation with the cops. They definitely wanted a shot at him. He figured he was better off not getting behind the wheel at all. I bought the light blue bread truck for $300. It was such a classic. Melinda and I tore into it to get it surf buggy ready. We gutted it, made some beds, and Melinda decorated it like it was a palace on wheels. Tapestry curtains, incense burning, hypnotic music, and religious chanting. We hooked up with friends on the island or ones who flew over to meet us, like David Hall. Either way, wherever we stopped, out of the truck poured Johnny, Carol, their 2 kids, Jerry and Sissy, and Melinda and I. I also made Johnny a board whenever he came over. It didn't start out for him because he didn't surf, but during the actual shaping, all of its design functions became apparent. It was turning out more cosmic than functional. After years of shaping, you get the feeling that each handcrafted piece of functional art has a heart, that there's a life inside. I never knew how any of my custom boards were going to turn out at the beginning. The characteristics slowly evolved throughout the shaping process until the board adopted the rider. Once you understand the surf you're encountering and you've become familiar with the equipment and its functions, it's a feeling only birds and dolphins understand. It's unbelievable riding the swells and wind currents, skimming the crest of the waves. What's even more satisfying and profitable is when your talent allows you to communicate with good progressive surfers who take the vehicle way beyond its limit. I would have been embarrassed to give the board I made for Johnny to anyone that surfed, and it turned out to be a good thing because it really fit his personality. The board was a real spaced-out idea for a cosmic guy. He loved it, too. I took a great snapshot of him standing next to his new surfboard on a riverbank in Kauai with his kids on each side, naked as 2 jaybirds. Johnny flexed his scrawny muscles and held up his board with pride. Later that day, we took it down to the beach and had some fun in the water. It was so great to see him out of his element and away from the pressures of Laguna Canyon. Ma'alea Maui was actually where my inspiration for the down rail board came. Years before Melinda and I moved up to the North Shore, my friends and I, as a group, adopted the spot. What can I say? We lived in one of the only houses that fronted the break. It was one of those days when trade winds were blowing a cool 75 degrees. The sky was blue, the clear water was in the 70s. There was no surf, flat, except for a wind swell that occasionally ran along the shallow reef. You could see the bottom and all the life around. I took my big wave board out for a paddle. It was a 10-6 pointed tail gun. 6 feet of flat area on the tail, turned down rail in the back with a full belly in the front like the board's Kern and Diff made on the North Shore. Except this one was made out of Clark foam and not the beautiful balsa laminated stringer boards they made back then. No one was out in the water. I was all by myself. To keep my fin from dragging, I turned the board around and prone paddled it tail first. Skimming along down the waves, I noticed 2 things. As I tucked the rail into the wave, the board would accelerate and go faster, and the down rail tail was displacing the water like a knife in butter. I was afraid I was going to bottom out and hit the reef. Guaranteed staph infection. It's common knowledge that the round bottom of a conventional board sinks deeper in the water and makes it hold the board in place, especially in big surf. But a flat surface skims the water, and the less relief you stir up, the faster you go. After a few more attempts, I realized the no-nose effect on the trim, the speed of the board, and the clean line of the rail displacement that had occurred. Later, in the shaping room, pondering over a blank, I realized the concept and its practical use in a surfboard's function. It's a challenge to tear into a blank and not follow the traditional ways I used to shape hundreds of boards. In fact, it was just the opposite. "Mike made really good guns," said Juan Shelton. "Diff's boards were too thin. Brewer was making guns too, but his best ones always came back to Mike's pintail." I didn't actually start work on the downrail until Melinda and I lived next door to Herbie at Backdoor. I'm pretty sure Herbie and I were the first to ride the rights at Pipeline. Both our houses faced the right hook, but man, we got into a shaping run that I will never forget. Herbie was always ready for something new. After making boards one certain way and never really making a mistake, I turned the template around and did everything completely different. With a little influence of beer and smoke, I got myself in the mood and was up all night working it out. If I screwed it up, I could use it as the next sacrifice at a pray for surf bonfire. First thing the next morning, I surfed the board in its hot-coated stage before it was even sanded and glassed. I was so stoked I ran back to the house and found Herbie. "Herbie, try this. Either it rides better or I'm still loaded." Paddling out, he was just as stoked. Then we went back to the shaping room, put our minds together, and the no-nose downrail experiment began. "The revolution wasn't even televised," claims Herbie Fletcher. Mike Hinson's inspirational understanding of surfing made him one of the greats of his time. He was as responsible for surfing's soul movement as anyone else, maybe more. He recognized that it was all about music. If you merge the cool of jazzmen like Herbie Mann, Dave Brubeck, and Jimmy Smith with the raw sweat of Ray Charles, that's what Hinson was all about. He was hearing Mingus out at Back Door where I lived in 1967. He built a shaping room next door and we began some serious experimentation. BK and Tiger Asper were there. Ask them. As the music started swinging towards Cream, Hendrix, and the Stones, Hinson shrunk the templates and dropped the rails. The minigun had arrived and Maui was the call. It was Mike who shaped me the first downrail board anyone had ever seen. He coined the minigun, and that's that. I worked on every template possible. At one time, I had a 10-board quiver from a 10.6 gun to a 6.9 pocket rocket. I also made a set of guns, 10.6 to 9.6 wire-kicked nose, 3.5 thick down rail that floated like frogs on a lily pad. Around the same time, a friend from Honolulu told me about some guys windsailing on big boards like the rental boards they rent out to tourists. The same guy took my 10.6 purple downrail gun and put a sail on it and smoked those guys. To this day, the hot dogs of windsailing boards look just like my first downrail. Mike made himself and Herbie the first no-nose board, says Juan. Everyone else was terrified to do that. The noses were so narrow they could catch waves sideways, turn the board from the nose, and go through sections completely covered. They were logical and fit in the tube, and everybody went crazy. Mike also made the stretch, a squared nose with a kick tail that would produce drag. To keep it in trim, you had to get on the nose, a nose riding board that made the Maury John Peck penetrate. When Jerry Lopez rode Pipeline on a 7.6 downrail, surfing took another step into the future. Those miniguns just smoked. I remember Diff telling me we were crazy. He thought I was taking it too far. At the time, the traditional ways of surfboard shaping and the blanks accommodated the old style of thinking. When it was clear that the concept was functional, the surfboard blank industry adjusted their molds and the downrail ended up completely revolutionizing the common board. Mike Hinson is often overlooked as one of the leading designers who brought the surfboard design from the longboard era to the modern shortboard, states Jerry Lopez. Perhaps the most significant phase in the history of modern-day high-performance surfing. You have to understand that there were not many surfers who were a presence in the longboard time who were able to make a successful transition to shortboards, and even fewer shapers. Obviously, when you think about the differences between an old longboard and a shortboard, you can see that riding one requires not only a different set of skills, but some different ways of thinking as well. Designing and building one required even more. The modern longboard is more an evolution of the shortboard than any continuation of the longboards of the 60s. Surf contests, if they are ever any indication of the state of the art, were actually paddle races in the late 40s and early 50s. So surfboard design at the time was probably evolving at the same pace as it is today, form following function, which back then was more tuned into paddling the board than riding it. From a design standpoint, the old longboards were probably best characterized by their lack of design relative to what we have today. No rocker, no rail shape, blunt outlines, thick and heavy. A surfboard in 1960 was not easy to ride even though they were light years ahead of the Blake cigar box boards. Once the young surfers figured out how to build a surfboard, it wasn't long before they started trying to make boards to ride the waves in ways they could only imagine, but far beyond the capabilities of their present equipment. Wanting to turn quicker and go faster led to smaller and lighter surfboards. Shape soon became the main factor in getting a surfboard to ride up and down in the tail, but were 50-50 amidships and turned up in the nose. Mike Hinson had a unique design that incorporated full rocker as well as turned-down rails from nose to tail. This was revolutionary at the time. Brewer was considered the leading surfboard designer, and when Reno and I showed him the boards we got from Hinson, RB immediately incorporated the rocker and turn-down rails into all of his boards. If you look at the basics of today's surfboard design, you can see that rocker and down rails are even more generic than the tri-fin setup. Of course, everything else about the surfboard has gone through a lot of changes, outlines, thickness, bottom shapes, but rocker and down rails have remained constant since 1970, and the world of surfing owes Mike Hinson a debt of gratitude. He remains today one of the unsung heroes of the modern surfboard. Michael was a very big inspiration to me during the 60s and 70s, admits David Nueva. I watched him surf. He was hot, hot like Dewey Weber. Michael was to San Diego what Dewey was to LA. I remember him surfing with Skip Fry. The Redfin Boys is what we called them, from La Jolla. We got to know each other at contests and started taking LSD down at Black's, getting out of the draft and mostly traveling. I was traveling a lot at that time, Peru and all over. Most of all, I remember Michael was an inspiration to me as a surfer and board maker. He made some fabulous boards back then, plus he was an idol of mine. At that time, I was just starting to break into competitive and soul surfing. Michael was surfing so smooth and doing all the maneuvers. It was really cool, more like soul surfing, not like it is now. One of the things I remember most about Michael was he was an innovator of a lot of the boards I experimented with, the best being the downrail boards. I remember Michael making me 12 of them, and I rode them from Steamer's Lane down to Rincon. At first, everyone laughed at us. We were about 10 years ahead of our time, until they saw me at Rincon. It was about 15 feet. I took the down railer out. Guys were dropping in on their boards, and I was coming in with a lot of speed going around them, then in front of them, then back behind them, and passing them before they could even get off their first turn. A lot of other guys started watching us and then started applying it to their boards. This all started from Hinson. We knew it was going to go in that direction. It was just a matter of time. Chapter 36. Standing in the Slide Zone. On the other side of the country, in a completely different revolution, the Millbrook clan heard rumors about the Brotherhood and sent scouts to check it out. Needless to say, Johnny was blown away when Timothy Leary's son appeared at his front door. Johnny invited everyone in and lit up the water pipe. He felt honored to share a smoke with Jack Leary and have the chance to explain the concept of the Brotherhood. He was proud of what they'd achieved. Then Jack described the filthy living conditions back east. Trash and shit were everywhere. Johnny wasn't prepared for this. He expected to hear all the great things they were doing in New York. You have to remember that Tim Leary was a god to Johnny. He read all of his books. He believed everything the man said. I mean, he put him so high up on a pedestal he'd never get down. Johnny took it hard. I don't know if he was more bummed out that it was dirty or the fact that Leary was just a human being. Whatever the case, he couldn't believe how screwed up Millbrook was. From the instant Johnny first dropped acid, the Brotherhood knew exactly what they were all about. So he wrote out a personal invitation to Leary to come to Laguna and see for himself. He wanted him to witness the purity. No filth, no violence, just brothers and sisters seeking out the goodness in the world. You really want to know what LSD is all about? Johnny got to the point. You get your ass out here in California. You guys are fucking it all up. The Millbrook party left for New York with Johnny's letter, and it didn't take long to get a response. Leary came out to Laguna in 1967. From the beginning, he totally dug the brothers. He liked what was happening so much, in fact, that a couple of months later, he, his wife Rosemary, and Jack moved a few doors down from Johnny and Carol on Woodland Drive. Johnny and Leary were both pretty persuasive people. Leary was the one with the ego, but he could be cool too. He had a sense of humor and rarely raised his voice. I liked that about him. I knew Leary came here with good intentions, but some people just didn't care for him. Laguna Lil's mother, a redneck woman in her 50s from Cajun country, lived right behind the Learys. Every time he and his friends threw their wet towels and bathing suits over the fence they shared, the woman would tie them into knots and throw them on their roof. Melinda wasn't impressed either. I met Tim Leary at Mystic Arts in the meditation room, says Melinda. I thought he was interesting, but more of an egoist intellectual than really spiritually aware. I truly believe he came to the Brotherhood to gain spiritual guidance. It was Johnny who was for real, not the tune in, turn on, and drop out crap Leary preached across the country. But as soon as he got to Laguna, he adopted the Brotherhood and became their spokesman. Johnny didn't like it that the media made Leary out to be more radical than he really was. In his eyes, even though Leary was just an innovator of the concept of LSD, his moving to Laguna validated everything the brothers were doing. It was the Brotherhood who was actually responsible for hitting the spot when it came to LSD, not Leary. They were never credited with discovering the new reason to drop acid, the opposite of the CIA's experiments. LSD was all about God. There were advantages because of Leary. The Brotherhood became much more streamlined. They already lived in their own little cocoon, but Leary was the one who convinced them they could totally survive without an outside government. Johnny agreed. We have a choice. We don't need all these laws to live our lives. He was right on. They were already successful. They had their own government and never had problems with money. They found a stronger purpose in their own talents and did whatever they could to help out. Right off the bat, every member got a 24-karat gold quarter-sized medallion designed by Art Risley to symbolize their new way of life. The front was embossed with a symbol from the Native Americans that stood for the four forces of the universe in motion: earth, wind, fire, and water. The back was inspired by Leary's League for Spiritual Discovery, which represented infinity. We also got a small satchel that carried certificates in case the cops pulled us over. I knew that a little piece of paper wasn't really going to protect me from the police, but I thought it would be kind of cool if I ever got stopped for possession and I flashed my card. Just when the Brotherhood was ready to completely pull out of society to start their own, the Sawdust Festival grounds moved from a vacant lot located on North Coast Highway to literally right next door to Woodland Drive. This meant that for 6 weeks out of every summer, hordes of tourists would be hanging around what Johnny already called Dodge City. Johnny had wanted to buy land ever since the Brotherhood incorporated. After talking it over with Leary, he found a ranch in Idlewild at the base of a valley in the San Jacinto Mountains. It was just off the 74 highway and behind a locked gate. The 300 acres were a way to get out from under the microscope of Laguna Beach. Through the gate, you drove up the hill and past rustic houses. At the top, there was a rundown main house with fireplaces everywhere, a cottage, corrals, and a barn that was surrounded by streams. The Brotherhood bought it and set up 7 teepees for their families. They wanted to live as close to the land as possible. Up the ridge were a few more houses and trails that they used as an alternate way out in case they ever got trapped. I stayed in La Jolla and shaped surfboards in my garage. I still carefully picked my times to show up and always had a good reason to be there. But the ranch sure beat Laguna Beach, all that traffic and police harassment. Everyone pitched in, cooking, cleaning, and sewing for the women. The men swept the tables, mended fences, and conducted business. The group was completely self-sufficient. They hardly ever went into town except to maybe pick up supplies once in a while. The Brotherhood also planted gardens, bought horses, and started renovating the grounds. For security purposes, the watchtower was strengthened and hidden in the eucalyptus trees, and a holding tank was built beneath the corral for incoming and outgoing loads of pot. The family also ate all their meals together. Melinda and I didn't really socialize with the Brotherhood families too much because it was so far from La Jolla, but we'd show up at the ranch for Thanksgiving dinner and other special occasions. I was used to large crowds for dinner, explains Melinda. I grew up in a house where every Sunday my father would have 20 to 30 people over for a meal. He taught us that everyone was the same. He'd sit the housekeeper across from the CEO of a large corporation and our gardener next to my godfather, Senator Barry Goldwater. The ranch wasn't very different. Kids ran around the spacious property, lit fireplaces, warmed the main house, and the women cooked in the kitchen for about 150 people. I can still see all the fresh-faced young women milling about, dressed in velvet and silks and beads from faraway lands, and I remember the sound of their clanking silver bracelets as they prepared the meal. Easter music played on the stereo when the men came inside, carrying a box of freshly rolled joints. When dinner was served, we all sat down, held hands, and shared a prayer before eating. Meals at the ranch were always an occasion, life as it should be lived. Leary was at the ranch too, just kind of around. He and Rosemary lived in a small cabin on the grounds but didn't really interact with the brothers. They did their own thing. We'd be sitting on the side of the hill smoking weed and Leary would show up out of the blue. You didn't even have to see him pull up. You knew he was there because of his bag of meat. Leary loved steak, potatoes, and a martini. I swear you could smell the blood from a mile away. Even though he was a carnivore, I still respected him. I mean, he was older and very smart. He was also a good speaker. He really enjoyed lecturing around the country about the benefits of LSD. When the Brotherhood set him up at a local auditorium for his lecture series, You Can Be Anything You Want This Time Around, he jumped at the chance. The Newport Beach Community Auditorium was almost full that Tuesday night. It wasn't a huge thing. I mean, people weren't stomping out in the streets or anything crazy. But the police found out about it ahead of time and were waiting nearby just in case. This was the only time I ever walked through the proverbial front door. Sitting in the front row with my friends, Leary came out and waited for the applause to die down. As soon as he started talking, he had command of his audience. It was amazing. Unfortunately, for me, that meant introducing the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. Jesus Christ, I panicked. I worked hard to stay out of the spotlight. I knew a few people in the audience, but the rest were complete strangers. I was very careful to keep my name and face from ever being publicly associated with the Brotherhood. I had a career to protect. To make matters worse, not only did he call on us, but he also asked us to get up and wave at the crowd. I swear, I felt completely naked. I didn't think I could stand up in front of all those strangers and expose myself to every law enforcement officer in the city of Newport Beach. So what did I do? Human nature must have taken over, because the next thing I knew, I followed the rest of the sheep and stood up. The brothers were stoked. They didn't worry about the danger Leary put us in. They stood proud. As for me, well, I faced the crowd, embarrassed as hell, and waved my hand up and down like a goddamned idiot. And if you ever need any assistance, Leary went on with his speech, the psychedelic rangers down here in the front row can give you the guidance you require. Chapter 37. Greed. I don't think anybody was really prepared when Leary came out to live with the Brotherhood. Yeah, I know, he brought a lot of good to the group. He showed Johnny how they could increase both their LSD distribution and profit if they had outside help. What he didn't tell them was that his connections were greedy. He knew the brothers were all about God and spirituality. But instead of thinking about their safety, Leary reassured them that his plan was a necessary evil. Meanwhile, Billy Hitchcock, the owner of Millbrook, hooked up with Bear Owsley. Augustus Bear Owsley Stanley III's father was a California State Supreme Court justice. His grandfather was the governor of Kentucky in the early 1900s. Bear passed on politics and earned a degree in chemistry in 1965 instead at Cal Berkeley, manufacturing methadone in his bathroom lab. Although it was raided right away, the cops didn't turn anything up because his stash was in his car. This scared him enough to hightail it to L.A., where he moved in with a couple of the Grateful Dead band members. Owsley was also into producing his own LSD. In 1967, he set up a dummy company called Bear Research Group and perfected an acid purification process that developed the first large-scale operation of an extremely high-quality LSD. In the first year alone, he distributed over 1 million tabs. When Leary moved out to California, the Brotherhood was hooked up with Owsley acid. Johnny and I drove up to Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco to score some of Owsley's righteous acid. There was a lot of action between Haight-Ashbury and the Panhandle. Everywhere you looked, bookstores, clothing stores, head shops, and the drugstore coffee shop were taken over by hippies. Hippie Hill in Golden Gate Park was at the end of Haight Street, where kids hung out selling crafts and playing harmonicas, guitars, and drums. Any day of the week, you'd find the scene going on. You could take a hit off a joint or ask around for acid while tour buses drove by every 5 minutes with people hanging out the windows gawking at all the weird hippies. Not only did Owsley make the best acid around, he also knew something about electronics. When he moved back up to San Francisco, he and a young scientist, Tim Scully, teamed up to design sound equipment for the Grateful Dead. When they realized they had a mutual interest in acid, the two men left the band and started manufacturing the substance in March 1965 in Orinda, California. 2 years into it, Owsley was arrested again, this time at his tabbing facility. He got caught with 200 grams of LSD and large amounts of STP with a street value of over $11 million. Owsley was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for possession and tax evasion. In a matter of days, quality LSD was almost impossible to find. That's when Leary suggested that Johnny drive up to Sausalito and discuss a potential connection. Tim Scully and his new partner, Nicholas Sand, set up operation in Denver. While Scully was in California on business in 1968, his home-based lab was busted. He got off because he was out of state at the time, but he still had a problem. He knew he could set up an LSD lab anywhere. That wasn't a big deal, but all of his supplies were impounded back in Denver. When he was told about the Brotherhood situation, he and Sand hit the road for Sausalito. When they met, Johnny wanted Scully and Sand to get a feel for what they were all about, so they were invited to the ranch a few weeks later. Sand hinted to Johnny about using a portion of the property for his operation. It was the perfect place for an LSD lab. Because of the attention it might draw to the ranch, the brothers passed on that part of the deal, but the men left with an agreement that the Brotherhood of Eternal Love would distribute their Orange Sunshine. Orange Sunshine, also known as ALD-52, was similar to, but not pure acid. Albert Hofmann had tested this same compound years before. Scully found Hoffman's papers at the UCLA Medical Center, the U.S. patent registered by Sandoz, and a table comparing the effects of ALD and other similar drugs. The paper said that ALD side effects weren't as bad as LSD. You got a stronger trip, and it left you in a more relaxed mental state. The only problem with reproducing Hoffman's formula was that Scully had to make LSD first, then convert it to ALD. In other words, although the result was legal, somewhere during the making it wasn't. To be on the safe side, Scully reversed the order so that he was never breaking the law, labeled it acid without the Brotherhood's knowledge, and sent it south to Idlewild. Right before the Brotherhood's eyes, greed was taking over. Chapter 38. The Road to Rainbow Bridge. Melinda and I were relaxing with Terry and Nina Stafford on their lanai on Front Street in Lahaina. Melinda's crush on Terry was buried long ago, and we all became good friends. We even had an invitation to stay with him anytime we were in town. Maui was also the place I came whenever I needed peace and quiet. And boy, did I need it, thanks to the shitty week I had back home in San Diego. "Michael, Jimi Hendrix manager is here." Les Potts burst into the Stafford's patio almost out of breath. "He's at the Pioneer and he wants to buy some acid." Les hightailed it over from the inn as fast as possible, where he and his sun-scorched friends had been trying to hustle someone into loaning them $10,000 to open a surf shop. When a middle-aged Englishman with thick Coke bottle glasses, kind of an Austin Powers lookalike, walked up to their table and introduced himself as Hendrix's manager, nobody believed him. But when he mentioned he was interested in investing in their idea, suddenly the guys were all ears. The man then pulled out a small tape recorder to play some of Jimmy's new songs and asked where he could score some pot or acid. Why wouldn't I believe Les? He was this scrappy toe-headed surfer from Huntington Beach that I met at one of the Sunday sessions and made boards with for a while. Mid-60s, Hinson was the shaper, says Les. Although I'd studied Sonny Vardaman, Gordy, and Mike Marshall, I was busy trying to figure out what designs would work. Mike already knew. I was still hungry for information, so I studied his every move. Shaping is one of those art forms where there is no school. You have to learn hands-on as an apprentice under a master. Les was also part of my crew on Maui. He'd been over in the islands for a couple of years now after he got out of the service, and we usually hooked up when I got into town. So it wasn't strange when he showed up at the Staffords. The coincidence was that he brought up Hendrix after everything I'd been through the week before. I reached in my pocket for some orange sunshine, pulled out my stash, and gave Les 3 hits. Go back to the Pioneer and tell him no charge. Things started getting shitty 9 days earlier when I woke up to a radio announcement in La Jolla. Jimi Hendrix was playing that night at the San Diego Sports Arena. After years of listening to the sounds of Hendrix, from my first splash at the Monterey Pop Festival where he burned his stick, to blowing his arms off at the concerts up in Frisco, Hendrix music has always been the lead in this psychedelic freeform style of John Coltrane. I felt his style of rock and roll was really a movement, an expression of the human soul, and it jived well with the feeling that surfing provided. Hendrix was just the sound I needed for a surf demo I was making for Bill Bain. It all started when I passed on an idea to him that George Downing came up with for a replaceable fin. It wasn't like I was ripping George off. There were no existing patent restrictions, and Bain agreed to pay him royalties. Now, I'm pretty spontaneous when it comes to designing boards, and Bain, well, he's the mathematician. With his keen business sense and incredible engineering ability, the fin box was introduced through Fins Unlimited. Bain then took it a step further and asked George, Dick Brewer, and I to each come up with a new fin. Not only is the fin the center of activity on a surfboard, it's actually the functional motivator. You have this basic thing hanging underneath your surfboard and you can't ride without it, but you never think too much about why. Trying to come up with an idea for the nose riding contest, I put fins all over the place. In the middle of the board, on the nose, I even put them on the rails and found out it only added more drag. Twin fins are basically training wheels, but in nature it's all about a fluid form, round, nose straight on. Only man makes corners. Driving down in Baja, I saw some dolphins swimming offshore and came up with the idea of using their fin as a template. Just as I thought about them surfing, they started surfing. When I hoped one of them would kick out, 2 dolphins rode the wave, then shot out in the air. I headed over to SeaWorld in San Diego with Jeff Devine, a photographer at Surfer Magazine. The trainers had their star dolphin Cindy hop out of the water onto the deck so I could trace her top dorsal fin. That's when I began to think about it. Their lines are appealing, they move fast, and in a flash they can change course, pretty amazing. They also have a combination of foiled wings. A shark can't move in the water like a dolphin. Their fins are straight. It's all about the foil. It's the back curve and a short radius. So I started playing around with 5 different sizes of Cindy's fin. As a result, all of my research paid off. I ended up winning over Bain with a small 3/4-inch, thick-foiled, 6-inch fin called the High Doll Fin. Because Bain liked my idea so much, he offered to finance a 16mm demo film about my downrail. Listening to the Hendrix announcement, I had a brainstorm. What if I asked Jimmy to score the music for my film? I knew he didn't know me from God, but he wouldn't even have to be there. I'd send him the footage and he could just return it with a reel of his songs. At 7 o'clock that night, Melinda and I drove down to the San Diego Sports Arena. We didn't need tickets. Melinda could get us in anywhere. She had ways of opening doors that were closed off to the average person. We walked down the concrete ramp at the sports arena, through the back door, and past security. I just stood behind her while she flirted her way in. "I'm with her," I said and smiled. Beauty rules in rock and roll. I swear, the sports arena was jammed. Every time I saw Hendrix in concert, he packed them in, and this was at the beginning of his career when he didn't have the rock icon image he has today. We made our way down the stairs. Thousands of Hendrix fans were stuffed in tight, pumped up and screaming for him to come out and play. We elbowed our way down onto the field and ended up not too far back from the front row, center stage. I knew if anybody could get Jimmy's attention, Melinda could. I mean, who wouldn't check out a tall, glamorous fashion model from New York? Jimmy came out on stage and the crowd roared so loud it could have shook the Coronado Bridge. His sound was so different and fresh. He really had a way of triggering feelings that moved you to tears of happiness. Unfortunately, catching Jimmy's eye was next to impossible. It just wasn't going to happen. He was far too gone by the time he came out on stage and totally into Foxy Lady. He was also busy flirting with all the half-dressed women in the first few rows. Hell, he was probably deciding which one he'd invite up to his room after the show. We left empty-handed. Even though I didn't connect with Jimmy the first night, I was determined to meet him. When he played San Diego the next night, I flew solo. Melinda was tired of my trip and told me to go by myself. I don't know how, but I weaseled my way past the same security guards without her. They must have remembered me from the night before because they let me through, no problem. Hendrix killed again. He rocked the crowd to one hit after another, Fire and Foxy Lady. After a few more songs, I gave up trying to make contact and sat back to enjoy myself. At the end, I pushed through the crowd and left the sports arena with nothing. On the way home, though, I made a commitment to myself that this was going to happen. After the next few days, I was completely amped. I can't explain why, but I drove my friends crazy until everyone got sick of me rambling on about Jimmy scoring my demo. When I couldn't get anybody to take me seriously anymore, I said, "Fuck it, let's go to Hawaii." We landed in Honolulu on May 30th. Driving past the Waikiki Shell, a block from the beach, Hendrix's name was plastered across the marquee. He was playing that night. Melinda and I couldn't believe our eyes. It was a sign. The Shell was packed. Over 8,000 people rocked to the opening band, Fat Mattress. We got right up near the front again, and just before Jimmy came out on stage, the full moon rose over Diamond Head. I don't know if it was because I was already pretty high, but I've never seen a moon that big or that orange. It blew me away. Jimmy immediately jumped into playing 3 songs in a row, Foxy Lady, Red House, and I Don't Live Today. Grinding the strings with his teeth, he created unbelievable sounds and handled his guitar like he was fondling a woman. Somewhere in the middle of this full-blown experience, a humming sound started coming out of a few of the amps. I'm not sure how many were on stage. There must have been at least 15 to 20. I heard later it was the first time they turned the amplification up that high. The small buzz kept up, just enough to distract Jimmy, and after about 30 minutes, he announced an intermission and left the stage. I guess to let the roadies take care of the problem. Then, an hour or so later, we were told that the sound system couldn't be repaired and the concert was canceled. The good news was that everybody was invited back the next night. I knew at the full moon concert in Hawaii, says Melinda, that Jimmy was going to be in our lives, and just as the thought came to me, the equipment failed and the concert was cut short. Melinda and I went to the second show with Reno Avalera and his girlfriend. Jimmy's performance started out even more unreal than San Diego. Everyone went nuts. People were jumping all over, in the aisles and on the stage. The only bummer was that I didn't make contact again. On June 1st, Jimmy gave a third show. I was over it and way too pissed off to keep trying. This was never gonna fucking happen. Bubby Boy, Les Potts, and our usual crew were in Maui, so Melinda and I hopped an inner island to stay with the Staffords. Sitting on Terry and Nina's patio, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After chasing Hendrix from San Diego across the Pacific to Honolulu, I guess all I really needed to do to hook up with him was visit the Staffords in Maui. Just sit on their lanai and his manager would come to me looking for LSD. So why did I go through all that crap? I just wish I'd known it before I ran around in circles for a week talking like an idiot. Melinda tried to calm me down. This is all for a reason. Everything you envisioned is happening, Michael. The more I thought about it, the madder I got. I don't know why I was so pissed off. It didn't make sense. Most people would have been blown away at how it all turned out and laughed it off. But I was on such a high thinking I was going to meet Hendrix that each time it didn't happen, I had to keep my spirits up for the next chance. I never really got to blow off any steam. Now that it was all over, I was letting it all out, and I'll tell you, I wasn't anywhere near the cooling down point. The first thing I did whenever I landed in Maui was acclimate myself to the water at Honolulu Bay, a quick 30 minutes north of Lahaina on Highway 30. As much as I'd like to take credit for discovering the bay, I can't. It was surfed way before my generation, sometime in the 1940s, I think. Thankfully, Paul Strauss and his friends accidentally found it driving around in 1960. It took a few minutes to hike down the red dirt trail to the beach at Honolulu. When we reached the bay, the surf was flat and no one was out. I really needed to get in the water, though, so while Melinda sunbathed off the cliff above, I floated around on my board. Paddling out in the warm water, I could feel the tension leaving my body. I finally started to relax. Out of the corner of my eye, I flashed. A man and a woman came out of a patch of cactus. At first, I thought I was imagining things. The guy looked just like Michael Jeffrey. Now, I'd been to a few Hendrix concerts in the past week, so I knew exactly who he was, and I thought, what are the odds of this happening? Melinda was right on. I was still in shock and way too far away to yell to Melinda. I didn't want to take a chance on scaring them off either, but I knew I had to make it happen now. Thank God Melinda caught on at the same exact moment that a perfectly shaped wave formed out of nowhere in Lake Honolulu and headed towards me. I didn't even have a second to think about what I was going to do. It was that quick, like a flash of lightning. I paddled furiously outside, turned the board around, and leaned forward to catch the lip as it was breaking. I dropped to a bottom turn right into a pocket, and the wave broke over me and shot me into a section inside where I was completely covered up. Shooting out of the tube, I drew up a little more action in the soup and rode into shore. It was so perfect, short and sweet. I couldn't have imagined it any better, and they saw every second of it stoned out of their minds on my orange sunshine. Now, I don't usually brag about myself, but I do know my way around a surfboard, and the only thing that could have enhanced what just happened was if they were on acid. My slick moves combined with an absolutely phenomenal wave intensified their psychedelic haze. Right before their eyes, Honolulu Bay transformed from a flat lake to me shooting the barrel with phosphorescent images trailing behind. That's called being in the right place at the right time. In the middle of it all, Melinda hustled over and dropped my ID on Jeffrey and his girlfriend like a bombshell. Melinda's hands were flying. Even from the water, I could see her eyes get big as saucers as she filled them in on every detail. Good girl, darling, I thought to myself. I was so proud of her. I couldn't have asked for a better promoter. Beauty, brains, and balls, that was my Melinda. That's my boyfriend, Michael Hinson, out there. Melinda latched onto her prey and wasn't about to let go. He's making a surf film and would love it if Jimmy could score the surf sequences. Michael Jeffrey told Melinda he loved the idea, but he was leaving for the mainland the next morning. It's not very often you get to see Melinda beg. She didn't know what else to do. She had Hendrix's manager in her clutches, and like a trooper, she wasn't about to let go. Jeffrey saw the disappointment in Melinda's eyes and couldn't take it. He suggested that I show up at the Pioneer that night so we could talk. Melinda smiled from ear to ear. I thought I even heard her scream, but I knew better. Melinda would never jump up and down and yell. She was a pretty cool cookie. Jeffrey stayed on the bluff for a few more minutes while Melinda came down to the beach to wave me in. I have to tell you, I was feeling pretty confident about the whole thing. Nothing could have improved on what had just happened. With one lucky wave, I was sure I'd reeled him in. I arrived at the Pioneer at 9 o'clock dressed in my trippiest clothes, a suit and a tie looking like I came straight from London. I called Jeffrey on the house phone in the lobby to meet me outside in the bar and sipped on a Shirley Temple while I waited. Even though I just spent the last 6 years of my life high on acid, I didn't drink much anymore. The cocktail lounge was your typical Hawaiian scene: lit tiki torches, the sounds of waves, a tropical breeze blowing through the lanai. I wouldn't normally have noticed the fat, bald Hawaiian fisherman and his buddies down at the other end of the bar, but they kept staring at me. I picked up on it immediately. The bald guy did not like me at all. I looked myself up and down. Was it my Shirley Temple, my long hair, my clothes? I couldn't figure it out. I kept to myself while he and his friends vibed me out big time. Where's Michael Jeffrey? I thought. I just wanted to get out of there. I knew that if he came down and I was gone, it'd blow my chances of meeting Hendrix completely out of the water. Forcing myself to stay put, I tried to ignore the mokes at the bar. Watching him through the mirror, it was obvious what this fat ass was trying to do. Moving closer and closer to my stool, he was really starting to freak me out. Just in case I was imagining the whole scene, I forced myself to calm down and casually moved over a stool. I pulled another in front of me for a quick escape. Then, looking away for just a second, he scared the living shit out of me when he got right in my face. I didn't have much time to figure out my next move, but I had to make sure we were both on the same track. I looked him straight in the eye and gave him the one thing Hawaiians hate more than anything else: that "fuck you, asshole" look, the stink eye. The moke flinched and snapped at me. "Hey, what are you giving me the stink eye? Fuck you, you long-haired hippie. You dead meat." With that, I jumped off my seat and threw both bar stools at him. There was no way he was going to kick my ass. I circled around the crowded tables, bumping elbows and spilling glasses of wine. "This guy's trying to kill me," I yelled. I knew the commotion would keep me from a public beating, so I kept running all over the room. I must have gone around 3 or 4 tables, but everybody clammed up and kept to themselves. So much for giving a guy a helping hand. When I looked up for Michael Jeffrey, the guy grabbed my arm. But before he got a good hold, I broke free, bolted out a nearby exit, and did a 200-yard sprint to Terry and Nina's house that would have won me a gold medal in the Olympics. A couple of minutes later, I rushed through the front door and into the back bedroom, climbed in the closet, and sat down to catch my breath. "What's going on? Did you see Michael Jeffrey?" Melinda and the Staffords were really confused. "No, I almost got the shit beat out of me," I yelled. "You go down there and tell Jeffrey to come see me." "That's it." Melinda was pissed. "We've come this far and there's no way I'm going to let you screw it up. Now it's my turn. Don't worry and don't leave." Melinda stormed out of the house and up the street to the Pioneer Inn. It was midnight when she finally got back with a big smile on her face. "Honey," Melinda said as she came through the door, "I'd like you to meet Michael Jeffrey." He and Lynn followed her into the house. "Michael," he shook my hand. I was so stoked. "That's the first time I've ever seen anyone surf. Trippy, man. Melinda told me about your movie and I think it sounds great." We sat around the Stafford's house for the next couple of hours, smoked and drank, and got along really well. Thinking that Jimmy was only going to look at my surf footage, Michael Jeffrey and I talked about making a movie together. The next morning, Jeffrey and Lynn split for New York. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and that you'll join us again next week as we continue reading from Mike Hinson, Transcendental Memories of a Surf Rebel. Until then, keep your toes on the nose, your bottom turns tight, and your stoke high. I'll see you in the lineup.